I'm going to show you how to make this healthy vintage pickle recipe. This recipe calls for 12 small cucumbers, 2 tablespoons of salt, a quart of water, 1 bunch of dill, 2 tablespoons of grated horseradish, 2 cloves of garlic chopped, and a dried chili pepper. I have here what equals to be about 12 cucumbers that are small, so I'm going to just keep packing them into this jar until I run out of space, and then I'm going to grab another jar if I still need more space. I'm playing it safe, so I'm going to double my spices and my brine solution, so everything in this recipe will be doubled except for the cucumbers. I also don't have any fresh dill on hand, so I'm using frozen dill that was chopped up fresh from the garden just a couple months ago. Let me tell you guys how I came across this recipe. One of my favorite things to do is going to the thrift stores for all kinds of things, including cookbooks. So on this particular day, I was looking at the cookbook aisle and I picked up a few books and I brought them home and I found this recipe tucked away in one of the cookbooks. This recipe was intriguing to me because I never use horseradish in any of my pickled ferments, so I wanted to give it a go and see how it would taste. Spoiler alert, I really enjoyed this recipe and I'll definitely be making it again for my family. I like to think and imagine who made this recipe and who they made it for. In my imagination, I think of a grandma working in the kitchen with an apron and making this recipe for all her kids and her grandkids. We have truly forgotten and missed out on so much wisdom and valuable information from the past. Look at our standard American diet today, and it definitely falls far from the mark of what was intended by nature. And recipes like this definitely bring back very healthy elements of cooking, such as fermentation. Right now, I'm just going to chop up some garlic coarsely so I can add that into my brine mix. Fermentation is a naturally occurring process in which sugars and starches and fruits and vegetables are broken down into acids and alcohols. Certain bacteria called lactobacilli break down the starches and sugars in fruits and vegetables. When you eat fermented products, you get a blend of prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. When we think of prebiotics, you have to think about the necessary conditions and substances that bacteria need to thrive, whether it would be inside the human body or in a jar. Probiotics would be the actual organisms that do all the work of fermentation. Then finally, we would have our postbiotics, which are the products that these organisms create inside our bodies or inside a jar. These byproducts of bacterial metabolism are what help us healthfully digest our food and assimilate nutrients in our bodies. So here I am, I'm just mixing up my 2 tablespoons of table salt into each quart jar of water. So I'm just using 2 of my quart jars that I have laying around to mix up my brine solution. You can use whatever you want. This is just easy for me to measure and use this way. So next up, we're going to grab our cucumbers and we're going to pack in the rest of the ingredients over the tops of these jars. You're going to want to pack these jars down really tightly with cucumbers, and you're also going to want to leave at least 1 inch of headspace over the tops of the jars. This will allow for any gases or bubbles to escape without making your jars overflow. So because I doubled my brine, I also doubled my other ingredients, so I'm just splitting up the horseradish evenly between the 2 jars. Of course, I'm going to use less for the smaller jar and more for the bigger one. Same thing with the dill. I'm going to just proportionally add dill to each jar as well. Lastly, we're going to pour the brine solution into the jars. You may have some brine left over, and that's perfectly fine. Just pour it out and don't use it. I'm going to show you next what you should not do. Do not seal your jars and make them airtight. No, no, no. That is not what we should be doing. Instead, what you want to do is you want to create a barrier that's going to allow air to escape the jars, as carbon dioxide is a byproduct of fermentation. In order to allow the carbon dioxide gases to escape during fermentation, I'm going to just put a 2-ply cotton cloth over the top of both of these jars. This cloth will be enough to keep anything out, but it will also be sufficient to let the gases escape while the pickles are pickling. You can also choose to use a rubber band around these cloths. I've done that before, but I just happen to have the canning lids close by, but there's a little bit of a trick of getting them on and making sure that the cloth fits as well. When these jars are sufficiently sealed, you're going to want to put them in a dark location at room or cooler temperature for the next day or so. Just bear in mind, as your ferment sits longer, it's going to get saltier. So if you plan to keep this ferment sitting for more than 24 hours, you're going to want to reduce the salt in the ferment. There are benefits to letting your ferments sit longer depending on what type of bacterial activity that you're going for. So science has shown that there are different strains of bacteria, and there's a different level of fermentation that is achieved the longer that you let your vegetables or fruits sit. Sometimes I will mix up the amount of time that I let my ferment sit. For cucumbers, I only let them sit for about a day or so. You don't want them to get mushy, you want them to have that crunch, and all those flavors are really going to infuse into these cucumbers very well, and there's no need to worry about them being bland or anything like that. As far as my other ferments go, such as like cabbage or carrots or any other firm vegetables, I like to let those go for 3 days. And depending on what you ferment, you're going to have different benefits with each fermentation. So fermentation is a great way to incorporate prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics into your diet. I believe that this is one of the reasons as to why our ancestors were definitely a lot healthier than we are today as a society. Let's be bringing back more healthy and nourishing and sustainable recipes into our kitchens. I hope you enjoyed your time with me today in learning how to pickle some cucumbers. This recipe will be found in the description box below.